There. I'm doing a book review, as you can probably tell, and the book I want to review is actually a poem, and that poem is The Dark Man by Stephen King. Now, Stephen King wrote this poem, I believe, when he was actually a freshman in college. I could be wrong on that, but I know he wrote this back in the 60s, and this was actually published in a literary magazine in 1969, but recently, like just last year in 2013, the poem was published in book form, and it was of course published as this book, and this actually comes with illustrations, and the guy who did the illustrations for this, his name is Glenn Chadbourne. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but he does the illustrations in this, and what's interesting about this poem is this poem was actually the basis for the character of Randall Flagg, who is one of Stephen King's most infamous characters. Now, for those of you who don't know who Randall Flagg is, Randall Flagg was the main villain in Stephen King's post-apocalyptic novel, The Stand. Now, in The Stand, it appeared that Randall Flagg was some kind of a demon in human form, but Flagg went on to be one of the main villains in Stephen King's book series, The Dark Tower, and he was also the main villain in Stephen King's fantasy novel, The Eyes of the Dragon. And in the Dark Tower series and in The Eyes of the Dragon, you find out that Flagg was actually an evil wizard from another dimension called Midworld. But this poem is essentially the first book from King to actually feature the character of Randall Flagg, who, I have to say, Randall Flagg is probably one of my favorite villains. Like, not just one of my favorite Stephen King villains, but he's definitely like one of my top villains from books. Like, to me, he's just such an interesting character, and I'm not really sure what it is about the character that drives me to him so much, but you know, maybe it's because he gets used so much in so many of Stephen King's stories, but there's just something that really kind of interests me about the character of Randall Flagg. And like I said, this poem is essentially the first book to feature the character. Now, the poem itself is only a few pages long, but all the illustrations in the poem, it kind of stretches it out to make it seem longer than it actually is. But the poem is all told from Randall Flagg's perspective, and basically it's about Randall Flagg going to different towns, and there's a part in the poem where he actually rapes and kills a girl. It's a very disturbing and very creepy poem, but I would definitely recommend checking it out, especially if you're a fan of Stephen King's books like The Stand and the Dark Tower series, and you're interested in the character of Randall Flagg. It's definitely worth a read, and the illustrations in this book, which are done by Glenn Chadbourne, once again, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but the illustrations in this book are actually quite beautiful. You know, here are just a few examples of them. Like, essentially in it, you kind of see things through Flagg's eyes. Yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out The Dark Man by Stephen King. It's definitely an interesting poem, and bye.